really should have read the fine print on the trust documents before you decided to ignore us. Victoria, Preston sneered, tossing a thick, legally bound folder directly onto my glass conference table. Dad left the management of the downtown commercial building to me. You are officially locked out of the operating accounts as of this morning. I did not blink. I sat back in my leather executive chair and looked at my older stepbrother. His wife, Audrey, was standing right behind him, clutching a designer handbag she had undoubtedly purchased on a high-interest credit card just for this occasion. Her face was twisted into a smug, triumphant smile. "Is that so?" I replied smoothly, folding my hands on the desk, "because my forensic audits show that the trust explicitly transferred full ownership of the holding LLC to me 3 years ago. You have no legal authority in this building, Preston." "We do now, sweetheart," Audrey snapped, leaning over the table and pointing a manicured finger at me. "Preston filed an emergency corporate resolution yesterday. We hold the controlling shares. By the time your expensive lawyers figure out how to file a motion, we will have already sold the building to the Vanguard Investment Group. You have 24 hours to clear out your executive suite." "Take the loss, Victoria," Preston added, buttoning his tailored suit jacket and turning toward the door. "You always were too slow to play the real game. If you leave quietly, I might write you a check for $10,000 just to help you with moving costs." They walked out of my office, leaving the faint scent of cheap cologne and desperate greed hovering in the air. I didn't yell after them. I didn't throw a tantrum or sweep the files off my desk in a fit of rage. I simply picked up the folder Preston had thrown, opened it, and analyzed the documents with the cold, mechanical precision of a senior corporate litigator. What Preston and Audrey failed to understand is that I do not play games. I dismantle them. I pulled up the state's corporate registry portal on my dual monitors. Sure enough, there was a freshly recorded document transferring the majority voting rights of my holding company into a new shell corporation, controlled entirely by Preston. The document bore my signature and my corporate seal. It had been officially notarized by a man named Marcus, a local notary public who I knew happened to owe Preston a significant amount of money from a failed business venture years ago. "They actually forged it," I whispered to myself, feeling a sharp, icy sense of satisfaction wash over me. Preston and Audrey were heavily in debt. I knew from my private investigations that their primary residence was facing foreclosure, and Preston's independent contracting business was drowning in unpaid municipal taxes. They were desperate, but attempting to steal an $8 million commercial high-rise by submitting forged corporate resolutions to the state is not a clever family scheme. It is a massive, undeniable federal crime. I pressed the intercom button on my desk. "Sarah, cancel all my afternoon meetings," I told my assistant. "Get the head of the commercial fraud division at our primary bank on line 1. Then, prepare a secure digital binder for the FBI field office." I had no intention of filing a civil injunction to stop them. A civil injunction would only freeze the asset and leave Preston and Audrey claiming it was a misunderstanding or a clerical error. I wanted them to feel invincible. I wanted them to sign the final closing documents with the investment group. The moment they accepted the multi-million-dollar wire transfer into their fraudulent shell company, the crime would transition from attempted theft to a completed, irreversible federal wire fraud. 2 days later, my phone rang. It was Preston. "Victoria," he said, his voice dripping with artificial sympathy. "I'm sitting at the coffee shop across the street. I think we should talk. I want to offer you an olive branch." I walked down to the cafe. Preston was sitting at a corner table, sipping an espresso and looking incredibly pleased with himself. Audrey was next to him, scrolling through luxurious real estate listings on her phone. "I am willing to offer you a flat 5% buyout of the sale," Preston told me, sliding a single piece of paper across the table. "That is $400,000, Victoria. All you have to do is sign this non-disclosure agreement and walk away quietly. If you fight me in court, I will tie this building up in litigation for a decade and you will go bankrupt paying legal fees. You are selling a property that you do not legally own." "Preston," I answered, keeping my voice perfectly flat. "The notary stamp on your corporate resolution belongs to Marcus. a man who has a suspended license for previous ethical violations. Did you really think I wouldn't check? Audrey slammed her phone down on the table. You are just jealous because your father finally realized Preston is the better business mind. She hissed loudly, drawing the attention of the other patrons. Take the money and disappear, Victoria, or we will leave you with absolutely nothing. I don't negotiate with thieves, I said, standing up from the table. But I will give you one piece of advice. Keep your passports easily accessible. Preston laughed loudly, a harsh, dismissive sound. You always were overly dramatic, he called out as I walked out the door. I went directly to the regional FBI field office because I had preemptively compiled 80 pages of indisputable evidence, including the original trust documents, the forged signatures, the communication logs between Preston and the corrupt notary, and the pending commercial sale contracts. The federal agents bypassed their usual preliminary investigations. They escalated the case immediately to the White-Collar Crime Division. I also notified the Internal Revenue Service. Preston had set up his shell company in Nevada, completely intending to evade the massive capital gains taxes on the $8 million sale. The closing date was scheduled for the following Thursday at the Vanguard Investment Group's downtown headquarters. Through my coordination with the FBI, the investment group's legal team had been quietly briefed on the situation. Vanguard agreed to play along and proceed with the closing under federal supervision. On Thursday morning, I sat in my office, watching the clock. At exactly 11 o'clock, the closing documents were signed. At 11:15, Vanguard's finance department authorized the wire transfer. $8 million flowed out of their secure institutional accounts and landed directly in the Nevada shell company controlled by Preston and Audrey. For exactly 20 minutes, my stepbrother and his wife were millionaires. I imagine they were standing in the Vanguard lobby, hugging each other and planning a month-long vacation in Monaco. At 11:35, my desk phone rang. It was the lead federal agent. The wire has cleared, Victoria, the agent said. The trap is closed. The 1-2 fursies, I didn't go down to the Vanguard building to watch the arrest. I didn't need the cinematic closure. I simply pulled up the live security feed of the Vanguard lobby that their IT department had granted me temporary access to. I watched as Preston and Audrey strutted toward the revolving glass doors, laughing hysterically. Suddenly, 3 unmarked black SUVs slammed onto the curb, blocking the exit. A dozen armed federal agents swarmed the lobby. Preston's arrogant smile vanished instantly as 2 agents slammed him against the marble reception desk and locked his hands in heavy steel cuffs. Audrey completely lost her mind. She dropped her designer bag, fell to her knees, and started screaming hysterically at the agents. Get your hands off him! We are wealthy! You cannot do this to us! Audrey shrieked, her voice echoing through the massive lobby. Call our lawyers! Call the mayor! An agent leaned down and spoke directly into her face. Ma'am, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and tax evasion. You do not have lawyers because the Department of Justice has just frozen every single bank account associated with your name. The fallout was an absolute massacre of their lives. Because the crime involved a federally insured transaction exceeding $5 million. The sentencing guidelines were apocalyptic. Preston and Audrey were denied bail. The corrupt notary, Marcus, flipped on them instantly to save himself, providing the prosecutors with text messages where Preston explicitly promised him $50,000 to forge my signature. Preston attempted to call me from the federal detention center a week later. The automated voice prompt warned me that the call was from an inmate. I accepted the charges solely to hear his voice break. Victoria, please! Preston sobbed into the receiver, his arrogant tone completely destroyed. You have to tell them it was just a family dispute. They're going to put me away for 20 years. Audrey is losing her mind in the women's facility. We will give the building back. We will give everything back. Please, Victoria. The building was always mine, Preston, I replied coldly. You didn't orchestrate a family dispute. You executed a multi-million-dollar federal crime. Enjoy the food. I hung up the phone and permanently blocked the facility's number. The Vanguard Investment Group smoothly unwound the frozen transaction, and my title to the commercial high-rise remained perfectly spotless. I eventually signed a massive 10-year lease agreement with a luxury hotel developer, securing my financial legacy for the rest of my life. Preston and Audrey are currently serving 15-year sentences in separate federal penitentiaries. Their foreclosed home was sold at a public auction, and Audrey's designer bags were seized and liquidated by the IRS to cover their massive legal penalties. They thought they could bully me out of my own empire because they mistook my professional composure for weakness. They failed to realize that while they were busy screaming and making threats in coffee shops, I was quietly orchestrating their permanent removal from society,